Before we even start this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because if you're a fan of hip-hop history, rap beef breakdowns, and deep dives into your favorite artists, you're in the right place. This is Fake Famous, and today we're talking about one of the most influential rappers of the last 15 years, Future. Now, if you listen to hip-hop today, it's almost impossible to escape Future's influence. The melodies, the toxic lyrics, the trap production, the whole vibe that defines modern rap, Future helped build that. But here's the crazy part. Future didn't start out as the untouchable trap legend we know today. In fact, when he first came into the game, a lot of people didn't even take him seriously. Critics said his music sounded weird. Some people thought the auto-tune was excessive. Others didn't understand why he sounded half singer, half rapper. And yet somehow, that exact sound ended up changing hip-hop forever. So today we're breaking down every Future album from the early days in Atlanta all the way to becoming one of the most dominant artists of the streaming era. We're talking about the hits, the flops, the mixtape run that changed trap music forever, and the albums that turned Future into a global superstar. But before we get into the music, we gotta start with where the story really begins. Atlanta. Future was born Nevadius Damon Wilburn in Atlanta, Georgia, a city that has produced some of the most influential artists in hip-hop history. By the time Future was growing up, Atlanta was already exploding as a music powerhouse. Outkast had already changed the perception of Southern rap, and artists like T.I. and Jeezy were helping define the trap sound that would dominate the next decade. Future was right in the middle of that environment, and one of the biggest influences in his early life was his cousin Rico Wade, a member of the legendary production collective Organized Noise. If you know anything about Southern hip-hop, you know Organized Noise helped shape the sound of Outkast, Goody Mob, and the entire Dungeon Family movement. So music was already in Future's blood. But even with those connections, nobody could have predicted how big Future would eventually become. Early on, Future was just grinding like any other Atlanta artist, recording songs, releasing mixtapes, trying to build a name in the local scene. But what made him stand out immediately was his voice. Future didn't rap like everybody else. Instead of the traditional rap delivery people were used to, he leaned heavily into melody. His songs felt emotional, sometimes dark, sometimes celebratory, and sometimes straight up toxic. And that emotional vulnerability became his secret weapon. By the early 2000s, Future had started gaining attention in Atlanta thanks to a series of mixtapes that slowly built his buzz. Songs were spreading through the streets, DJs were playing his records, and the industry was starting to notice that something different was happening. Future wasn't just another trap rapper, he was creating a sound that blended street music with melody in a way that felt futuristic, which is actually where his name came from, Future. And once the industry started paying attention, things started moving fast. His first official studio album arrived in 2012, and it introduced the world to a new kind of trap star. The album was called Pluto. Now, Pluto was important because it showed the industry that Future had real potential. One of the biggest records from the project was Tony Montana, a hypnotic trap anthem that quickly became one of the most recognizable songs in Atlanta clubs. The record was so big that Drake jumped on the remix, and when Drake co-signs you, the entire rap industry starts paying attention. But the real moment that showed Future was different came from another record on that same album, Turn on the Lights. That song revealed a completely different side of Future's artistry. Instead of aggressive trap energy, it leaned into melody and vulnerability. Future sounded almost heartbroken on the record, and it proved that he wasn't just another street rapper trying to make club hits. He could make emotional records too. That balance between toxic trap anthems and emotional melodic songs would eventually become one of Future's defining traits as an artist. And Pluto gave fans their first glimpse of that formula. Now, if you're rocking with the video so far, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because we're about to get into the era that really started turning Future into a star. Because the next album in his catalog showed that he wasn't just a one-album wonder, it was called Honest. And this project was the moment when Future started aiming for something bigger than just Atlanta. Now, before Future was dropping platinum albums and dominating streaming platforms, he had to grind through the mixtape circuit like every Atlanta rapper at the time. And this is where Future really started building his identity. In 2011, Future began releasing a string of projects that introduced his sound to the streets. The first major one was Streets Calling. This mixtape showed early signs of what Future would eventually become known for. The production was dark, the melodies were heavy with auto-tune, and the lyrics reflected the lifestyle that surrounded Atlanta's trap scene. But the real momentum started building when Future dropped Dirty Sprite. Dirty Sprite became one of the projects that helped define early 2010s trap music. The mixtape had a raw, hypnotic energy to it. The beats felt heavy and atmospheric, and Future's voice floated through the production in a way that sounded completely different from most rappers at the time. Instead of attacking the beat with aggressive bars, Future leaned into melody. He stretched his words, bent notes, and turned emotional pain into hooks. Some people didn't understand it at first, but others immediately realized something special was happening. Around the same time, Future also released a project called True Story, continuing to build his reputation in Atlanta's underground rap scene. By this point, DJs across the city were starting to support his records, and his name was spreading beyond local clubs. Then came another mixtape that pushed his momentum even further, Astronaut Status. This project helped solidify Future as one of the most promising artists coming out of Atlanta. His sound was becoming more polished, the production was bigger, and his confidence as a performer was growing. Future wasn't just another mixtape rapper anymore. He was building a brand. The astronaut imagery, the futuristic themes, even the way he delivered his vocals all made it feel like he was trying to create something bigger than just another trap project. And that vision eventually led to his first official studio album, Pluto. When Pluto dropped in 2012, it was Future's official introduction to the mainstream music industry, and the album had several moments that proved he had serious star potential. One of the most important records on the album was Tony Montana. The song quickly became a club anthem in Atlanta and eventually spread across the country. The hypnotic beat, the repetitive hook, and Future's unique vocal delivery made the record impossible to ignore. Then Drake jumped on the remix, and when Drake co-signs your record, the entire industry starts paying attention. Another standout moment from Pluto came with the song Turn on the Lights. This record showed a completely different side of Future's artistry. Instead of aggressive trap energy, the song leaned into melody and vulnerability. Future sounded almost heartbroken on the record. And that emotional honesty became one of the key ingredients in his success, because Future wasn't just rapping about street life. He was rapping about relationships, pain, addiction, and the complicated emotions that come with fame and success. Pluto proved that Future could create hits, but the next album showed that he wanted something bigger than just club records. 2 years later, Future returned with his second studio album, Honest. Now, Honest was an interesting moment in Future's career because it felt like he was trying to expand his audience. The album featured collaborations with some of the biggest names in music, including Kanye West, Pharrell, and Drake. Records like Move That Dope brought Future back to his trap roots with dark production and aggressive flows. But the album also had more polished, radio-friendly songs that showed Future experimenting with different sounds. Some fans loved the direction, others felt like the project leaned too far into the mainstream. But behind the scenes, Future was going through something that would completely change the direction of his music. A breakup. And that emotional shift led to one of the greatest mixtape runs in hip-hop history. Because after Honest, Future disappeared for a moment. Then he came back angry. And the first project he dropped during that period was a mixtape called Monster. Now, if you know Future's catalog, you already know what time it is, because this is where things get crazy. And the first project he dropped during that period was a mixtape called Monster. Now, if you know anything about Future's catalog, you already know this is the moment where everything changed. Because the Future that came back after Honest was not the same artist. This version of Future was darker, more aggressive, more reckless, and the music reflected that energy. Monster dropped in late 2014 and immediately felt different from anything Future had done before. The production was haunting, the lyrics were colder, and Future sounded like a man who had completely embraced chaos. This is the era where the whole toxic Future persona really started taking shape. The mixtape was executive produced by Metro Boomin, and that combination turned out to be one of the most dangerous partnerships in modern hip-hop. Monster gave us songs like Codeine Crazy, which many fans still consider one of Future's greatest records ever. The song felt hypnotic, emotional, and completely raw. Future wasn't just bragging on that record. He sounded exhausted, hurt, and numb at the same time. And that emotional darkness became part of the appeal, because listeners felt like they were hearing the real Future. But what made this moment even crazier is that Future didn't stop with just one mixtape. Most artists drop a project and disappear for a year. Future dropped Monster and then kept going. Just a few months later, he returned with another project called Beast Mode. Now Beast Mode had a completely different energy. Instead of Metro Boomin's dark cinematic production, this project leaned heavily on the legendary Atlanta producer Zaytoven. The beats felt more soulful but still aggressive, and Future sounded completely locked in. This project reminded people that he could still dominate over traditional trap production. And then, he did it again. Not long after Beast Mode, Future dropped another mixtape called 56 Nights. At this point, it started to feel like Future was on a mission to flood the streets with music. 56 Nights was hosted by DJ Esco and carried that same dark, gritty tone that had become the signature sound of this era. By now, the internet had started noticing something. Future was on an unbelievable run. 3 projects, less than a year, and every single one of them had fans talking. But Future still wasn't done, because in 2015, he finally delivered the album that many people consider his masterpiece, DS2. Dirty Sprite 2 wasn't just another Future project. This album felt like the culmination of everything he had been building toward during the mixtape run. The production was massive, the hooks were unforgettable, and Future sounded completely unstoppable. Tracks like Fug Up Some Commas, Where Ya At featuring Drake, and Thought It Was a Drought became instant classics. The album was dark, hypnotic, and unapologetically trap. And when DS2 debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts, it confirmed what fans already knew. Future had officially taken over, but right when people thought he might slow down after DS2, Future did something that only added to his momentum. He teamed up with Drake. The two artists released a collaborative project called What a Time to Be Alive, and the chemistry between them was undeniable. The project blended Drake's melodic style with Future's trap dominance, and songs like Jumpman quickly became huge hits. At this point, Future wasn't just a trap artist anymore, he was a superstar. But what made Future so interesting as an artist was that he never stayed in the same lane for too long. After dominating the trap world for several years, he started experimenting again. And that next phase of his career would produce one of the most unusual moments in hip-hop history. Because in 2017, Future dropped 2 albums, back to back, 1 week apart. And that move would once again prove why Future was operating on a completely different level than most artists in the game. He dropped 2 #1 albums, 1 week apart. Now, before we get into that moment, if you're rocking with the video so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button and like the video. Fake Famous is where we break down hip-hop history, rap beefs, and deep dives like this, and if you're a real fan of the culture, you're definitely in the right place. Now back to the story. After the legendary mixtape run and the success of DS2 and What a Time to Be Alive, Future had officially established himself as one of the biggest artists in the world. At this point, most rappers would slow down, maybe take a year off, tour the album, let the hype build. Future did the opposite. In early 2016, he released a project called Evil. And if you're wondering why the title sounds strange, it's actually the word love spelled backwards, which honestly makes perfect sense when you think about Future's music during this era. The themes were darker, colder, more toxic. Evil continued the sound Future had been developing during the Monster and DS2 era. The production was heavy, the melodies were hypnotic, and the lyrics leaned deeper into the chaotic lifestyle that had become part of Future's brand. Songs like Low Life featuring The Weeknd became huge hits and showed that Future could dominate both the streets and the charts at the same time. But even with the success of Evil, Future wasn't finished experimenting. Around this same period, he released Purple Rain, another project that fans still talk about today. Purple Rain felt like a bridge between Future's mixtape energy and his evolving mainstream sound. And then came the moment that shocked the entire music industry. In February of 2017, Future released a self-titled album simply called Future. The project debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts. For most artists, that would already be a huge moment. But Future had another surprise ready, just 1 week later. He dropped another album, NDRXX. Now this project was completely different from the previous one. Instead of hard trap production, NDRXX leaned heavily into melody, emotion, and almost R&B style songwriting. This was Future showing a completely different side of himself. Songs like Selfish with Rihanna and Use Me felt more personal, more reflective, and more vulnerable than the aggressive trap records he had been known for. And when NDRXX also debuted at #1, Future made history. 2 albums, 2 weeks, both #1. At that point, it became clear that Future wasn't just riding a wave, he was controlling it. But Future still had one more major collaboration coming during that era. Later that same year, he teamed up with Young Thug to release Super Slimy. Now this project was exactly what fans expected from those two artists. Wild energy, unpredictable flows, and a chemistry that only two Atlanta legends could create. Super Slimy didn't try to be overly polished. It felt loose, chaotic, and fun in the best way possible. It reminded everyone that even while Future was dominating the charts, he could still tap into the raw energy that made his early mixtapes so exciting. And by this point in his career, Future had accomplished something very few artists managed to do. He had survived multiple eras of hip-hop, the mixtape era, the trap explosion, the streaming era, and somehow he was still one of the most relevant artists in the game. Future once again began evolving his sound, and the next phase of his career would introduce projects like The Wizard, High Off Life, and eventually one of the biggest records of his modern era, I Never Liked You. And this era would prove something important. Future wasn't just a legend of the past, he was still shaping the sound of hip-hop in real time. Now before we get into the final chapter of Future's career, I need you to do two things real quick. First, hit that like button if you've been rocking with the video so far. It actually helps push the video to more hip-hop fans who love this type of content. And second, if you're new to the channel, subscribe to Fake Famous because we drop deep dives like this every week, breaking down rap history, album runs, and the stories behind the biggest artists in hip-hop. Now let's finish the story. By the time the late 2010 rolled around, Future had already accomplished more than most rappers ever do. Multiple #1 albums, a legendary mixtape run, hit records that dominated both the streets and mainstream radio. But instead of slowing down, Future entered another phase of his career where he refined his sound even further. In 2019, he released a project called The Wizard. Now this album felt like Future reflecting on everything he had been through in the industry. The title itself hinted at the idea that Future had mastered his craft. He wasn't just experimenting anymore. He understood exactly how to create the sound that fans loved. The production on The Wizard was polished, but still dark and atmospheric, staying true to the style that made Future famous in the first place. Songs like Crushed Up and Jumpin' on a Jet kept that trap energy alive while showing that Future could still evolve his delivery. Around this same period, he also released a shorter project called Save Me. This one felt much more emotional and experimental. The songs were slower, more melodic, and almost haunting at times. Save Me showed that Future was still willing to explore different sounds instead of repeating the same formula over and over again. Then in 2020, Future returned with another major release, High Off Life. This album arrived during one of the strangest periods in recent history when the entire world was dealing with the pandemic. But even during that moment, Future managed to dominate the charts again. The album included songs like Life is Good featuring Drake, which became one of the biggest hits of that year. The record blended Future's melodic trap style with Drake's smooth delivery, and once again proved that their collaboration was almost guaranteed to create a hit. High Off Life continued Future's streak of commercial success and reminded everyone that he was still one of the most reliable hitmakers in hip-hop. But Future wasn't finished collaborating. Later that same year, he teamed up with Lil Baby for a joint project called Pluto x Baby Pluto. This album brought together two of Atlanta's biggest stars from different generations of trap music. Future represented the generation that helped build the modern trap sound, while Lil Baby represented the newer wave that grew up influenced by artists like Future, and that collaboration showed just how much impact Future had on the artists who came after him. But then came one of the most confident statements Future had made in years. In 2022, he released an album called I Never Liked You. Now, just the title alone felt like classic Future energy. Cold, unapologetic, and a little bit petty. The album debuted at #1 and included records like Wait for You, featuring Drake and Thames. That song became one of the biggest hits of Future's later career, and showed that he could still dominate both streaming numbers and radio play. At this point, it had been over a decade since Future first entered the mainstream rap scene, and somehow he was still at the top. But the story doesn't stop there. In 2024, Future teamed up once again with Metro Boomin for a project that immediately caught the attention of the entire rap world. We Don't Trust You. This album didn't just deliver strong production and Future's signature flows, it also became a major talking point in hip-hop because of the tension surrounding certain artists in the industry. And then not long after that, Future followed it up with another project, We Still Don't Trust You. At this stage of his career, Future had proven something that very few artists managed to achieve: longevity. He had survived multiple eras of rap, he had adapted to the streaming era, and he had influenced an entire generation of artists who came after him. But even after all of those albums, Future still had one more surprise for fans: Mixtape Pluto. This project felt like a return to the energy that started everything in the first place. The gritty mixtape sound, the atmospheric production, and the hypnotic melodies that made Future stand out in the early 2000s. It was almost like the full circle moment of his career, from Dirty Sprite to Mixtape Pluto, from Atlanta mixtape rapper to one of the most influential artists in modern hip-hop. Future didn't just make hits, he helped shape the sound of trap music itself. And whether you love his music or hate it, there's no denying the impact he's had on the culture. Now, before we wrap this up, I want to hear from you. What's the greatest Future project of all time? Is it DS2, Monster, NDRXX, or one of the newer albums like I Never Liked You? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown of Future's entire album run, make sure you subscribe to Fake Famous, because we've got a lot more deep dives coming. Rap beef breakdowns, album explainers, and the stories behind some of the biggest artists in hip-hop history. I'll see you in the next one.